So, real quick before we move on to the next passage here, you might think that you're holding up a good appearance, and it might even fool some of the people around you, but rest assured that man doesn't look like God looks. He's not looking on your outside. He's looking at your heart this morning. He's looking at your heart this morning. Let's look over in Jeremiah chapter number 17. In Jeremiah chapter number 17 and in verse number 9 it says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" Who can know it? Well, the answer is found in the very next verse. It says, "I, the Lord, search the heart. I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings." The heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. And Mark chapter number 7, I know I'm going quick here, so if you're missing some of these references and you want to write them down, you can come see me afterwards. I'll let you look at my notes, and if you can't read them, I'll tell you what they say. In Mark chapter number 7, verse number 21, it says, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within and defile the man." The heart, and over in Proverbs chapter number 15. In Proverbs chapter number 15, I promise I'm going somewhere. In Proverbs number 15, in verse number 13, it says, "A merry heart maketh a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of the heart the spirit is broken." And in 17:22 it says, "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones." Earlier I said that you can have the outside looking good, but God's looking on the heart. And ultimately, young people, what I want to tell you is as hard as you try to make the outside look good, your heart's going to give you away. You know, what's on the inside shows up on the outside. Hey, what's going on in your heart will show up on the outside. George Mitchell used to say all the time, hey, young man, your face is breaking out in words. Your face is breaking out in words. The heart. I was just giving you some verses here so that we can kind of come to a very oversimplified. My apologies. I was just giving you some verses here so we could come to an oversimplified, sort of kind of understanding definition of what the heart is. And if I were to way oversimplify it, I would say it's probably your character. It's probably your character. It's probably your desires. It's probably the way that you handle yourself. It's probably the way that you live your life. Hey, if I were to oversimplify what the heart is, I would simply say it's just who you are. Now, I know that the heart can be complicated. I was a teenager once. Man, I wanted different things depending on what day of the week it was. But if I were to oversimplify it, the heart is simply just who you are. Now we're about to jump into what I really want to talk to you guys about and deal with you guys about. Let's look over in 1 Samuel chapter number 13. And this is a phrase that's found twice in the Bible, and you hear it said all of the time. 1 Samuel chapter number 13, and we're going to jump into it. In verse number 14, it says, "But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart." And the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, that thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. The other place that a man after, we hear that David is a man after God's own heart, and David has been talked about quite a bit so far this week, as far as I can understand. But the other place that you find that found is in Acts chapter number 13. You don't have to turn there. I'll just read it to you real quick. In verse number 22, it says, And when he had removed him, it's talking about Saul, he raised up unto them David to be their king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after mine own heart. A man after mine own heart, which shall fulfill all my will. A man after God's own heart. That's what I want to preach to you guys about this morning. A man or woman, those are the only two options there are. You got to be one or the other, and you can't change teams. You're born, and that's the way it is. A man or woman after God's own heart. A man or a woman after God's own heart. Point number one, we're going to look at the definition of the word after. A man after God's own heart. After. I Googled these, so if you're like, that's not the right definition, it's not my fault. It is my fault. But I Googled them, and I'm pretty sure they're right. After. Point number one, after. Next to and following in order of importance. Hey, David put God's desire and God's will before his own. You see it all the time. Now, we understand that David had his own desires and David had his own will, and sometimes those things got him into trouble, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But more often than not, David put God first in everything that he did. In everything that he did. We can see that, a really good picture of it over in 1 Chronicles chapter number 17. Now, those of you who are paying attention in church Sunday morning, you guys will know that at this moment, I was sweating bullets because I thought Pastor was going to preach my teen camp message. He turned to 1 Chronicles 17, started talking about Samson. I was like, I've got 3 days to change the whole message. But he didn't do it, so we're good. We're good. 1 Chronicles chapter number 17 and verse number 1, it says, Now it came to pass as David sat in his house that David said to Nathan the prophet, Lo, I dwell in a house of cedars, but the ark of the covenant of the Lord remaineth under curtains. Then Nathan said unto David, Do all that is in thine heart, for God is with thee. So what we have at this moment is David sitting in his house, and he's contemplating things, and he's like, man, look at this nice house I have. I have so much. The Lord's blessed me, and he's sitting here, and he's looking at all this stuff, and then he goes, but the ark. The ark. We don't have a house for the ark. How can I have this wonderful big house made of cedars, and the ark's just sitting under some curtains? So he goes to the preacher, and he says, Nathan, listen. I want to build a house for the ark. And you know what Nathan tells him? Go and do all that is in thine heart. He says, hey, what you want to do? It's a pretty good thing to do. It's a pretty good thing to do. Go ahead and do it. The Lord's going to be with you. But let's look at verse number 3. And it came to pass the same night that the word of God came to Nathan, saying, Go and tell David my servant, Thus saith the Lord, Thou shalt not build me an house to dwell in. Uh-oh. David's got a desire. David's got something he wants to do. Hey, he went and sought some counsel on it, and they said, hey, go ahead. It sounds like a good idea to me. And God said, hold off on that one. He said, hold off. I don't tell him not to do it. Tell him not to worry about it. But also tell him that after he dies, after he passes on from the scene, I'm going to have one of his sons do it. I'm going to have one of his sons do it. So let's look at what the story is. Because in today's generation, this sounds really weird. Somebody wants to do something. Somebody else says, hey, that's a good idea. But then the one who's calling the shots says, no, don't do that. And you know what David does at the end of that chapter? He praises God anyway. He praises God anyway. Brother David, when was the last time you saw a teenager be told no and they didn't get an attitude about it? When was the last time you thought you had a good idea and somebody came along and said, that's a bad idea, and you just didn't go do it anyway? Listen, this is a rare occasion. If you go through and you read that, David wants to do something for God. He's not doing it for himself. He wants to do something. He wants to build a house for the ark. And God says, no, son, no. I have your boy do it, not you. And David says, well, praise the Lord anyway. Praise the Lord anyway. He didn't get an attitude. He didn't stomp off and tell Nathan this or that. He was the king. He could have done whatever. Who in Israel was going to stop him? God says no. David said, yes, sir. And it didn't affect his relationship with God not one bit. Not one bit. Young people, how many times do you get an idea? And how many times do you need to seek counsel on it? And if the counsel doesn't come back as exactly what it is you want to hear, how many times do you heed it? How many times do you heed it? God wanted to do something. David wanted to do something. God told him no. And he worships God at the end of the chapter anyway. Hey, young people, you got some friends who you like. Obviously, you like them. They're your friends. They're your friends. And you get all these ideas of what it is that you want to do with your life. And I get it. I was a young person. Listen. Dude, I changed 17 careers before my first job. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was like, I'm going to grow up to be a firefighter. No, look at me. Who am I carrying out of a burning building? I was like, you know what? There was a time I wanted to be get into MMA. I wanted to be a mixed martial artist. And I started training for years. I was like, this is it. But I got weak bones. I twist my ankle just walking to the basketball court. Listen, when I was a young person, I had all kinds of grand ideas of what David was going to do with his life. And I knew that I was going to take every single one of my friends with me. And I knew that we were gonna do so much stuff together, and we were gonna have a good time together, and everything was gonna work out the way that David Neath planned it. But God said no. But God said no. And you guys are in the same position. You have your friends. You have your plans. Some of you know how you're going to make it through this week without having to deal with God. Some of you guys know how you're going to make it through this week, and you're going to talk to that girl you've been waiting to see, or you've been talking to that boy that you've been waiting to see, and God's been saying, no! No! So what are you going to do? How often do you stop and just ask God what He wants for you? In Proverbs chapter number 16, verse 9, it says, a man's heart deviseth his way, but the Lord directeth his steps. Young people, let me tell you something right here, right now. This week, the Lord's going to be giving you some direction. The Lord is going to be speaking to you guys this week. From my understanding, I got here in the afternoon yesterday. From my understanding, the messages that I missed, God's already been speaking. Hey, God's been trying to direct you guys already. But it's up to you guys to choose whether or not you're going to take that path. Hey, a man's heart devises his way. You're going to come to a fork in the road and you're going to say, I've got to go this way or this way. And God's going to tell you, if you seek God out, He's going to tell you which way to go. But ultimately, it's your decision. Ultimately, it's your decision. Now, I'm not telling you that you cannot have a will of your own. I'm not saying that. Listen, it's a good thing to have a job. It's a good thing to have a job. It's a good thing to if the Lord gives you peace about it and He allows it to go on, it's a good thing to pursue a career. But is that where God wants you to be? Young people, it's a good thing to one day want to get married. It's a good thing to one day want to get married. Hey, but that girl that you've been shooting looks at camp, hey, girls, that boy that you've been kind of just awkwardly standing close by, just like hopefully he'll invite you into the conversation. I know how teenagers work. I did all the same dumb stuff, all right? Listen, it's good to one day want to get married, but is that the one? Is that the one God wants you to marry? If God wants you to do something, there's some young men in here who I'm sure believe that they're called to preach. Brother Samson said it last night. It's becoming more and more rare that we even hear that a young man is called to preach. But I believe that even then there's going to be some young people in here who haven't said it, or the Lord's dealing with them about preaching, or the Lord, they know that they want to do something for God. Hey, that girl, is she going to help you out? Is she in a position to be that wife that you need to do that? Hey, same thing, ladies. Same thing, ladies. We had a young lady stand up and said that she was going to give her life to God. She said, I'm giving it to Him. He can do whatever He wants with it. Hey, all of you all got to make the same exact decision. But don't let some stinking boy get in the way of that. Hey, make sure he's the one God wants for you. Let me tell you, man, if you mess that decision up, it can ruin the rest of your life. This is a big deal. Make sure it's the one God has for you. After. Next to and following in order of importance. You have what you want. I get that. But what God wants has to come first. It has to come first. Inevitably, your will and God's will is not going to line up. And when you're faced with that decision, which way are you going to go? It's going to happen. It's going to keep happening. I would like to say that once you get older and you think you've got it all figured out, that it's just it's easy from here on out. But it's not. You're going to keep getting faced with decisions, and you're going to have to keep making the right ones. Which leads me to my next point. Point number 2. Point number 1 was the definition of after, which is next to and following in order of importance. Point number 2 is the definition of the word after, which means in pursuit or quest of. David was a man after God's own heart. Hey, not only did David care about what the Lord wanted, but then he did it. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't even know where I heard this quote. I heard it a long time ago when I was a kid, and it stuck with me for my entire life. They said, success is knowing the will of God and doing it. Listen, you've got to get after it. All right? You've got to get after it. In Acts 13:22, the end of that verse says, when he's talking about David, it says, who shall fulfill all my will? Hey, you can't just know what's right. You've got to live it. You understand what I'm saying, young people? I've got so many people that I could personally know. I can give you a list of names who grew up in the same church as me, who grew up in the same youth group as me, who sat under the same preaching as me, and they know what's right, they know what's wrong, and they're nowhere near the house of God. Because they never made up their mind to do it. Hey, young people, get after it. We got so many young people in every church that I go to, and you know what's killing youth groups and churches in general? It's apathy. It's apathy. We got young people going to churches and they do not care what the preacher's saying. They do not care what God is saying. They don't care what the mom is saying. They don't care what the dad is saying. And they sit there and they go through the motions, and at the first chance they head out the door. And it's getting bad. Is it getting bad? Oh, apathy. You guys think you can hide the fact that you don't care, but man, I can see it strangling the life out of every single one of you. Victor, you run games, so you probably know, and it probably gets under your skin just as much as I do. We can't even get teenagers to play games that much anymore. Games. Games at a youth night. Hey, we're going to play dodgeball. Nah, I'm going to stand off to the side. Dodgeball. Like, what? You can't even get to play games. Hey, listen, I'm going to tell you right here, right now. You know what's worse than somebody on your team that's not necessarily good at the game you're playing? It's somebody who refuses to play to begin with. It's somebody who refuses to play and try to begin with. Listen, I'll play basketball with people who've played maybe once before in their entire life, and I will have a good time. I will have a good time. But if I say, hey, do you want to play some basketball? We need an extra man. No. Why? You're watching us. You're standing here. You look like you're dressed like you want to play. Why don't you want to play? No. Or they'll get on the team. You'll convince them to play on the team, and you pass the ball to them, and they just stand there like, what do I don't know. Man, does that drive me up a wall. Oh, does that irritate the fire out of me. Hey, get in the game, young people. Apathy is killing every single one of you. Every single one of you. And you think, it's fine. I'm just going through life. I'm going to make it through. We're good to go. You're not. You're not. We've told you time and time again, every pastor, every preacher will tell you the same thing. The more you don't care, the rougher your life is going to end up. Full stop. End of sentence. There's no but, there's no and, there's no maybe. If you don't care about the will of God in your life, you're going to end up in a hole. Get after it. Get after it. Nobody's ever won a race by stopping halfway through. Run that ye may obtain. Keep going. Keep going. Psalms 143. Psalms 143, in verse number 10, it says, Teach me to do thy will, for thou art my God. Thy spirit is good. Lead me into the land of uprightness. You see what that first part of that verse says? You know what it doesn't say? Teach me thy will. You know what it does say? Teach me to do thy will. Teach me to do thy will. Let's look at Psalms chapter number 51. Start in verse number 10. It says, Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Hey, this is a good place to get it done. Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of thy salvation, and uphold me with thy free spirit. Then will I teach transgressors thy ways, and sinners shall be converted unto thee. Hey, then will I teach transgressors thy way. In Mark chapter number in 16, in Mark 16 and verse number 15, very, very familiar verse. (16:15) it says, And he said unto them, Go ye into all the world, and preach the gospel to every creature. Did you guys know that God's will for your life involves you doing something? It involves you doing something. Hey, teach me to do thy will. Hey, then will I teach sinners and transgressors. Hey, go into the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Hey, God's will for your life does not involve you sitting around twiddling your thumbs. Whether it be like this or like this. Hey, God's will for your life is to get busy. Get after it. Hey, it involves you doing something. You can't stop. You can't give up. Hey, stand up for what's right and don't back down. This is an illustration. I meant to even tell you this before I got up to preach, but been so busy I kind of forgot. These notes right here, these notes, they do something for me. See, I grew up with a young man named Phil. That dude, I mean, he was my best friend. He was my brother. You know what I mean? He lived at my house. He calls my mom and dad sometimes. Like, I'm talking, when I say we were close, we were close. A lot of you guys know who he is. A lot of you guys have met him. Hey, Phil was family to me. Family. And you know what I did? Every time I was asked to write a name on a piece of paper and leave it on an altar, you know whose name was on that piece of paper? Phil Hess. Phil Hess. Every single time it was on a piece of paper, there's probably multiple preachers that got a piece of paper with Phil Hess on it. Pray that he gets back in church. Pray that he gets back in church. I've asked churches to pray for him. I've prayed for him myself continuously. I've put him on every piece of paper. I've asked everybody to pray for Phil Hess. Brother Samson, do you know that 3 weeks ago Phil Hess walked into the church unprovoked? Unprovoked. Nobody called him and said, hey, I want to see you in church. Nobody said, hey, man, you need to get right with God. He just one day woke up and said, told his wife, grab the kids, we're going to church. It did my heart good. After service, I walked up, I gave him a hug. I hugged his little girls, his daughters. I hugged them. And you know what he said to me? He said, David, I'll see you next Sunday. And I looked over at Eric Reed and I went, yeah, we'll see. You know who walked into the church? You know who walked into the church the following Sunday? Phil Hess walked into church the following Sunday. And his daughters are in my wife's junior church class. Woo, man. And she teaches them, and she comes to the car, and she tells me how much they're listening, and how much they're getting out of it, and I've been praying for years for his family. Hey, don't give up. Get after it. If you don't hold the fort, who are they going to come back to? Who are they going to come back to? You better get after it, young people. Because you might not realize it, but there might be somebody in here or out there that's a friend of yours or a family member of yours, and they're holding on by a thread. They're holding on by a thread, and you might be that thread. If you give out, who are they coming back to? You better hold the fort. You better get after it. Hey, you better get serious about God. Hey, you better get busy. Point number one was the definition of after. Next two and following in order of importance. Point number two was the definition of after in pursuit or quest. Point number three is the definition of after. In allusion to. Here's some illustrations. In allusion to. One of my best friends back there, Eric and Bethany, they got a brand new baby this year. Brand new baby. I mean, cute as a button. Which is a big deal for me because I'm not big on babies. But he is cute as a button. Adorable little guy. Throws up all the time, and most of the time I don't even care. You know, when he was born, like the first 700 questions that were asked, who does he look like? Does he look like Eric or does he look like Bethany? I mean, he rolls his eyes at me a lot, so I'm like Bethany. But everybody's like, who does he look like? That is when a baby is born, that's the first thing anybody cares about. Who does he look like? I was like, he was born 15 minutes ago. He looks like a potato. Leave them alone. Let him grow up a little bit. But that's all people ask. Who does he look like? Does he take after his dad? Does he take after his mom? We want to know. Another one are the Rymans. Man, is the Ryman gene strong. Listen, if I didn't know the Rymans personally, I could walk into any room and like point every single one of them out. Ryman. Do they all look so similar? The Ryman gene runs strong. Is there any doubt that Israel is Samson's son? Any doubt at all? It's strong. Rymans all look the same. Illusion. I gave you the definition of after in illusion too. Some of you guys might not know what the word illusion means. I didn't, so I looked it up. Illusion. An expression designed to call something to mind without mentioning it explicitly. David reminded people of God. David reminded people of God's heart. When people look at you, are they reminded of God? Are they reminded of God's heart? Are they reminded of what God's done in your life? Now, often it gets said all the time, my life is my witness, or they know that I'm a Christian by the way that I live. That's a good sentiment, all right? Like, I get it. I'm glad. But if you don't get the first two steps taken care of, this third one's never going to happen. Understand that in order for you to just remind people of God, you got to put Him first, and you got to chase after His will. Hey, it's good to be different. But if you don't tell them why you're different, they're just going to think you're weird. You got to tell them the reason why you're different. They're not going to put the connection together on their own. Hey, but once you start putting God first, and once you start chasing after what He has for your life, then when you walk in a room, people are just going to know. People are just going to know who you are and what you're about. Like my pastor says, I'm about my Father's business. Hey, people will know, and you're not going to have to hound them about it. But the first two steps have to be taken care of first. Once people know that you put God first, and once people know that you're chasing after His will, then they're going to look at you and know what you're about. We had our youth rally back in May, and Brother Holloman's son came to our youth rally. Caleb, right? And Pastor says, I'm going to have him give a testimony. And he gets up and he starts talking, and he's going through, and this boy sounds exactly like his dad. I mean, their voices are the same. He has the same voice. He has the same mannerisms. He has the same inflections. He stands the same. He acts exactly like his dad. If I had closed my eyes sitting in that seat, I would have thought that David Holloman was preaching. And you know what he said in the middle of his testimony? He said, growing up, I just wanted to be like my dad. And I looked over at my wife and I said, well, he did it. He did it. He pulled it off. Hey, young people. I just want to remind people of my Father. I just want to remind people of my Father. What He's done for me. How good He's been to me. How He works miracle after miracle. How He works things out in my life. How He's given me second chances. How much He's just laid out for me. I just want to be reminding people of my Father. Who do you take after? Who do you take after? In illusion to. When you're walking around, do you remind people of God? An old preacher one time said, you can say that you love the Lord, and it'll take a lifetime to prove it. I want to remind people of my Father. I'm going to leave you guys with this right here. Young people, if you are a man that's after God's own heart, and you are a man that's after God's own heart, then, and only then, will you become a man that's after God's own heart. Every head bowed, every eye closed.